ever stop to ask yourself, why do I handle money the way I do? Is it something I learned growing up? Or is it the fear of success that's holding me back?
Or maybe it's society's unspoken rules, rules that we follow without ever questioning. What if everything you think you know about money and success isn't the full story?
That's exactly what we're unpacking today with our guest, Chris Gerardi. He's an entrepreneur, a builder of complex systems, and someone who's deeply reflected on the connections between our mindset, our money, and our personal growth.
But we're not stopping there. We're exploring the real roots of risk-taking, how mental poverty can trap you financially, and why true success isn't about the money. It's about the action you take and the lives you impact.
So, if you're ready to let go of mental and emotional baggage, question the truths you've been handed, and start building real wealth, both financially and mentally, this is the conversation you need to hear.
Because let's face it, the keys to success, they're not found in society. They're found in faith, relentless action, and helping others along the way. So let's unpack it all on today's episode.
Stay tuned. This episode might just change how you think about money, success, and yourself. This is the Fi Guys. Let's get started. So tell me, what did your parents teach you about money?
You know, my mom didn't teach me anything about money. My father taught me money is king. And, that's really the reality of probably for me where, when I was younger, I always thought that money was the key to success. And being I was born in 82. So, think about, I grew up when malls were at their peak. People were buying, right? Like wealthy people, or people who are doing well wanted to drive the Mercedes, BMWs and Mercedes and things like that were not the norm, right? Not like today, right? Like you could make 70 grand a year and go lease a Mercedes today, right? You back when I was growing up, you didn't do that. Debt was not available on the levels that it is today. I think that was, so what I saw around me was my father, who was very much in the corporate realm, whittled his way up and up and up and up. And that was his focus, was to get as high as he possibly could, make as much money as he could. And I think in my father's world, money was the end all, even though he would deny it in person. Mm-hmm. I think that actions are always speak louder than words. And my mother, who grew up my father grew up very poor, and that's probably some of that. My mother grew up fairly well off, and so I don't think money was the same for her. Mm-hmm. It just was, the drive was not the same. So I think what happened was I learned a little bit from both, right? Money's not everything, but money, you have to have money. Money in my mind solves for 96% of a person's problems. You can solve almost like any problem with money, except for, time. Can't find love with money. And
fulfillment, maybe.
You can't buy more. You can't buy more time with money, as far as like your existence. Maybe to a degree, but to such a fine degree that, I don't think it really matters. But yeah.
So you said that your dad, the words you used for what he thought about money, what he taught you about money, is that money is king. When you say that, how did he? I doubt he expressed like money is king, Chris. What is it that made you kind of feel like, oh, like money is the end all be all from dad's
I think just watching my father, his presence was always very important to him. There's a lot of things that I respect about my father. We don't have much of a relationship today, but I respect his work ethic. He's very smart. He's very diligent, and he was I just watched him growing up. It was very much grow into these corporate executive C-suite level career path, and that's the path that he moved for, and that's what he ultimately accomplished. And so with that came mid-range six-figure incomes and stuff like that, and a very good financial lifestyle. And so I watched him, he was always liked cars, always had very nice cars, nice homes, stuff like that. And he went through his tribulations, and when he was younger, right? But I think, he's overcome most of that from a financial standpoint, or all of it really. And, um, he always just had an emphasis on money growing up, the way you live, the way you're presented, what do you have? He didn't say it outward facing, right? But
Hmm.
you saw it by example. And I think for me growing up from a very young age, um, I grew up in Western Nebraska in my parents' divorce when I was very young. And
Okay.
so imagine being, uh, you know, an Italian kid in Western Nebraska. I think I was one of two in the entire county that I could think of. And your parents are divorced, right? Like a lot of my friends' parents, probably thought that I wasn't going to do anything productive in the world. My
Which
father
parent
was in
did you live
college.
with, Chris?
I lived with my mother. I saw my father every other weekend. He lived in Colorado, so I think it was a good experience as far as like I saw both sides, right? I saw Colorado and the growth and the financial world, or the corporate world and stuff like that. And then I grew up in this kind of small podunk cow town where I saw that world. And so it was kind of I have a kind of an odd mixture, right? Like I live in Nebraska again. I was in Colorado for 21 years, but my wife would be like, Chris is innately like, cowboy mentality, but you wouldn't know it by meeting me, right? You know, so kind of a weird childhood like that. And I think it was challenging for me because most of my good friends' parents were still together. Um, and, I always had a drive from a young age to make money any way I could. I was a very risk was adverse as a major risk taker. Not necessarily risk as far as like, hey, I'm going to go down a skateboard and fly off a ramp risk and break my head. I was more like very risky as far as I calculated risks on everything I did. And I
Hmm.
seldom ever got in trouble. And if I did do something I shouldn't have done, I never got caught doing it. And I think that there's that mindset that can, if you can hone it and channel it, can be very productive. But if you don't channel, it can be very destructive, right?
I'd like to go back, Chris, and double click on something that you talked about. And what I'm hearing is there was like a dichotomy in your childhood. You had your father who grew up poor and then aspired to make more money, make more money. And when I asked you what your mom taught you about money, you said nothing. But I have to imagine that if you lived with her primarily, maybe she never taught you directly, but what did you maybe pick up indirectly from her spending or just from observing her?
Yeah, I think I learned probably some conservativity with spending. Just because you have doesn't mean you should. So I would say that definitely came. I think my father embarks on that to a degree, but my mother definitely more. I think what I learned from my mother was the adverse of what she did. My mother grew up, her mom and my grandfather and my grandmother were not like, very close, loving grandparents, right? My grandfather did very well. And my grandmother was a homemaker, and my
Mhm.
mother and her didn't really get along that well. And, you know, I think my grandmother lived in fear of a lot of
Hmm.
stuff. I don't know why. It wasn't like financial fear, just fear in general, like fear and worry. Like my grandmother didn't like drive more than 3 miles from her home for the last 40 years of her life. I'm not exaggerating. Like she just wouldn't. She lived, my grandfather passed away. She lived off of, you know, his money till she was 93 years old. And she just did not venture out. And I think that some of that fear was instilled in my mother from a young age. So my mother always had like this, like, hey, don't over leverage, don't do this, don't do that, all these things, not what to do. And I think innately in my father's side is much more risk taking side. And so I think I learned to kind of mend them together, but that was not by like, hey, that happened overnight. I mean, that was years of failing in multiple situations to learn this stuff.
So let's talk about that, Chris, because what I find with most people as they develop Parents often have different views on money. And of course, no one actually knows what their view is. They just have feelings or they make statements. And you grew up with quite a dichotomy of the one who wants to make money, spend money, maybe is frugal, and your father as well, but wants to show money, and your mother grew up in that fear. Maybe money to her was a sense of safety and security. And for your dad, maybe it was a sense of power, for the lack of a better
Yep.
word,
Yep.
growth.
Yep.
As you grew up, I have to imagine that most kids, they'll either fall to one side of the spectrum, whatever parent, obviously, that they're usually closer to, they'll think that parent must have it right, the other parent doesn't have it right. It seems to me that over time, you've probably been able to meld these two things, because there's pathology on both sides. And somewhere in the middle is what we need to actually try to figure out. Tell me how this dichotomy showed up in your life, and how are you able to eventually mend it and get to where you are today?
Yeah. So, I think that what we have to realize is as we become older is our parents, for the most part, most parents are going to do the best that they can. But parents are not perfect, right? And I think what we have to realize is our parents inadvertently create a lot of damage without even realizing it psychologically.
Yes.
And so I think what happens is we go through these pathways of problem sets that we run into, and what happens is we end up in these reoccurring problems as people. And the reason we have them as reoccurring problems is because we fail to address the root problem, the root cause. So for me, I had this very aggressive, risk-taking financial mindset. On the flip side, I had guilt, worry, and everything else, right? Which I think was kind of driven from kind of being around my mom.
Mm-hmm.
If you have too much, feel guilty. All these weird things. And I think what happened is I went into the corporate world and I worked for a corporation, and I had a relationship that I was in for 11 years, give or take, and I had recognized all these problems that I had, which were I was just this risk taker. Sometimes I never thought about how it would affect others. And very much what I've seen in my father is he does not think about how things affect others. And so up until my early 30s, I'm 42 now, so 32, 33, that was my mind. I'm going to go through, I'm going to take risk, and how it affects other people is not going to matter to me. And this is how life, you have to be aggressive. You have to win
That's
at
right.
all costs, that mindset, right? And guilt would always creep up behind the scenes and then would pull me into some other direction. And in between, what would happen was I would just end up kind of in this place where I would battle back and forth mentally. And I think it caused me a lot of problems because it didn't let me really express and win to the level that I should have won early on in age. I talk to my wife all the time. I'm like, if I had the mind that I had today, at 20, I mean, who knows but I always tell myself there's never a timeline for anything. But essentially what happened was um, I went through I met someone at work a woman that I absolutely fell in love with. I don't think I ever really knew what love was because my parents never showed me what love was, right? And so what happened was, as I met this woman that I fell in love with, and she really honed in on my strengths and weaknesses. And through time of being around her and being with her, I realized that you can take risk, but you can also figure out how that risk can be a positive for other people and people around you. And if you can channel that risk and make it a positive for everyone around you, the guilt doesn't have to be associated with it. If you can let go of that guilt and that stuff when you win, right? Let me give you an example. Like when you make $500,000 or $1,000,000, like for the first time, there's a lot of emotion sometimes that goes with that stuff, or beyond that, right? And not everybody's been through that. But what I can tell you is there's emotion that's part of that because a lot of it is this great feeling of financial success, but then sometimes this feeling of some guilt in there where you're like, man, why, I've done so well. Why? And then you go out and you see people that aren't doing so well. And you're like, you get the, so I've battled with that, but the way I've overcome that is by working to create something that can help everybody. I think that's where I've been able to, channel these things and look at it. And I think this is really hard for people to dissect, because the truth is if you're going to build something that you can truly feel great about, then it's got to be able to help everybody, and I think what we've gone down this road where everybody is only concerned with the dollar. Dollar, dollar, dollar. How much is your company worth? How much is it making? That's the revenue. Blah, blah, blah. Look at me. I've done so well. I'm so great. I'm so great. And that's been the focal point. And really the reality is the humility. Anytime you get too aggressive, too risky, too, what's the word? Arrogant. Man, it's a recipe for financial disaster in its own way. Because what people don't realize is, and maybe the person making the money or doing well doesn't realize, is they're wrecking other people on the way up.
Yeah.
Indirectly.
And that, that I would always say, and it's almost a meme at this point, but the most important question someone could answer is how they feel about themselves when they're by themselves in a room alone.
Yep.
And I'd like to go back for a second. So I have to imagine that when you were younger, did you ever feel like as you were getting successful that you would maybe sabotage that? Because I'd have to imagine that this is something that I
sabotaged it. I sabotaged my own success 3 times.
Okay.
Absolutely. Just 3 times.
Just so our audience members, because when I do my coaching, what I often hear people will say is something to the effect of, mom or dad told me money is bad. People with money are bad. And then as people start to get that success, they're like, Dad, because your dad told you like money is good. So you're getting that success. And then once you have that success, the mom trigger would come in and say, no, money's bad. And now if you get more success, that would make you a bad person. So you would sabotage it to not give yourself success. How are you able to eventually overcome that? Because the hardest thing I found for people is for them to question what they believe is true. Because there's a lot of things that might be true back then, but is it true for you today? And most people can't even realize what their truths are or what automatic scripts are automatically playing. How did you get through that? Because from my own interpretation of what I've gone through, it's extremely difficult, and I don't know how to tell people how to do it.
I think I still deal with it today. Not the guilt or any of that stuff or self-sabotage. But I think what we have to realize is you hit on a point that is very valid, which is we are told money is bad. And we are told that the rich are evil. That's just what most people are told. If you're growing up in an average middle-class family, you're told tax the rich, the rich are evil, and the poor are evil. And we're all in the middle. What I have realized at 42 years old is when I started this journey and I finally, it was an oath for me. It was like, I'm going to take the oath. I'm going to stick it out through thick and thin, no matter how it goes. If I go to zero, I go to zero. If I go to anything beyond that, whatever. I don't care about the money. I don't care about all that. And I had to tell myself that I was not going to, I could not care about what other people thought. And what I realized was the farther I've gone up, the more people that I grew up with and knew, frankly, talk shit about, hate. They hate it. They hate the success that I've built. And what I've realized is the people who have invested in me, or a lot of them done very well. And when I say that, invested in my company, some of them I have not even had one conversation with ever. Maybe an email. And they've been the most supportive people in my life. And they're all wealthy people. And so they've found wealth, and they've used that wealth to help people like me help them build things that are going to be positive for the world. And the way they look at it, I think, is, hey, this is going to be great for the world. It's going to help the world, and we're going to fund it. And we're going to help you. We know that you can help build this, and so we want you to be along for that ride with us. And unfortunately, in that ride, there's a lot of people who don't like it because they're still doing the same shit that they were doing 8 years ago, 9 years ago when I started my journey. 10 years ago, it's like 9, going to be 10 years for me, whatever. And they can't They can't stand it. They can, even though when I see them, or, I grew up in a small town, right? If I go back home, like, I'll see, they may act like they're all great, man. But deep down, they hate it. They absolutely hate it because they're still struggling every day because because what they thought that they could take the path of least resistance is
The
now
easy
turned
way.
into a path of nothing but resistance. And I took the path of resistance. And the farther you go up, the less resistance you get a lot of times. Now, I'm not saying there's not resistance, but there is. But at the end of the day, if there's a mountain around me from a physical standpoint, I'm going to try to climb it. That's just my mindset. I'm not going to sit it out because I'm worried about how cold it's going to get, how brutal it's going to get, whatever. And so I think you have to be willing to take everyone's going to talk shit about you. And they're going to talk shit about you whether you made it or you don't. It's just what happens. And so we've kind of turned into this society of people that we would rather tear each other down than build each other up. And that's really a shame. I mean, it truly is.
I think too many people, they see someone else's success, and rather than being happy for them that that person is able to succeed, they look at themselves and say, why wasn't I able to succeed? And I don't want to have to put in the work. I think if there was a formula to finding fulfillment, it would be setting a goal, working towards that goal, failing, failing, and failing. But one thing that you just touched upon that I'm going to add to it now is also trying to bring more people along the ride to that goal as well. Try to lift as many people up as we possibly can. Because if you're trying to just get your own self to be fulfilled and not worry about anyone else, well, that's just striving for more money, more power, more whatever, and you're never going to reach that enough. There's always going to be more you can get until you feel that you're actually helping people because you've aligned your values with the values of the collective, of the whole.
I think you just hit the key word, which is a collective. I think we are moving into a new world, and the new world is, if we don't find a way as a collective globally to work together through our differences, to be willing to put the swords down through our differences, we are going to be in a very, very tough position in the future. And I think what we have to realize is, regardless of, all these boundaries that are put up are just boundaries. They're just that, right? There's no difference between you, me, Dominic. I mean, at the end of the day, skin color, eye tone, whatever, we are at base model, essentially the same. And through human history, we've created all of these ideologies that are just completely false. They're completely false from top to bottom. And the hardest part is getting yourself to face the truth and knowing that, well, it's all a lie. Mm-hmm. And frankly, nobody knows anything. We only know what we create around us and what we envision. I think there are some things we know, very few things we know wholly spiritually within ourselves. But I think for the majority of us, I don't care what Discovery Channel tells me, History Channel tells me, nobody knows exactly where we came from, how we got here, why we're here. We can all have our own thoughts on that, but nobody knows definitely. That might be expressed to the afterlife. And some people don't even believe in that. So I just think it's just we have to find a way to come together as a collective, and we got to look around at each other and go, hey, man, it's not me against you. How can I help you? And that is something that I've learned, by the way, being around wealthy people. They very much are like, hey, how can I help you? And when I talk to people, and I've talked to people that I've met, or whatever, and they're like, hey, how did you do this or whatever? And I'm like, I want to bring as much value to the people around me as possible. I want to bring as much value to my investors. I want to bring value to people that I don't even know. I want to give them as much value as possible. And I believe if I can give all my value as much as possible, then I'm doing the world a bigger benefit than any dollar can do. Some of that is related to money. Some of it's not. But sometimes it's just giving people 5 minutes of your time.
I wonder if the thing that could help people to feel more fulfilled was the intention that you set behind the goal. if I think too many people, they set the goal, and the goal might be lofty, might be all these things, but if the intention behind it, if the energy that you're putting behind it is bad energy, then even if you reach the goal, you'll realize that that's bad. But if the goal was to help other people, well, by definition, by helping other people, if we are a collective, you are helping yourself.
Yes. If you help others in the right way, you will, with the right reason behind it, you will help yourself. You will help everyone. And I think, when I created the company that I'm building now, that was the goal. How can I create something that helps people? How can I create something that actually helps people? Not something where they get on and videotape themselves and go, I'm broke, life sucks, I can't afford anything. How about turn that camera off, take a step forward, and quit thinking about you? And if you find a way to start thinking about others, you're going to be a lot farther in 5 years than you're going to be when you continue to tell everyone your sob story. We've all got sob stories. We all have trauma. The question is what are we going to do with our sob story and our trauma? Are we going to turn it into a positive? Are we going to keep going down the negative road and hate everyone who figures it out? Because what you find out is a lot of very wealthy people went through trauma and everything else too. And they just found a way to manifest that trauma into something positive.
So there's an American author, his name is Joseph Campbell, and he wrote the story of myth, and basically he brings down the archetypes of all stories in history down to four fundamental characters. There's the victim, the villain, the hero, and the guide. And what I just heard you say is some people, they'll go through their entire life bitching, turn on a camera, complain. They'll just play the victim their entire life. Pretty easy role. You don't have to do much. All you have to do is complain that everyone else is imposing their will on you. Then there's the villain. And the villain's the person that went through that trauma, just like the victim did, but they decided, I want other people to feel this trauma too, because I'm going through this and everyone else needs to be there. Then there's the hero. And I think this is the path, Chris, that you're on. And this is the hero, the person who goes, these are the traumas I've gone through. Yes, all this sucks. And this is what I'm going to do about it so that other people don't have to go through the exact same things. And at some point, we all try to hope that we become like Obi-Wan Kenobi, Gandalf, Bilbo, where we transcend that hero role. We now become a guide, and we try to help other people along the path to get to transcendence, divinity, whatever that word might be. How did you come to the realization that there is no objective truth? And what do you define as truth? How do you define that for yourself?
Yeah, I think from a very young age, I looked around at everything around me. This probably starts when I was like 6. And I questioned everything, school system, everything. And I was like, man, this stuff is just bullshit. It's a bunch of lies. I got in a lot of trouble growing up for that mindset, man. The teachers hated me. I was a guy who just didn't believe their bullshit. And I knew that all the stuff that they were telling me was not going to really matter. And I think it probably had something to do with my parents' divorce, maybe. Maybe it just made me not trust anyone. And through that, I learned to question everything. But I think there's a fine balance, because even though we know that there may not be any particular truth that we think we know, that doesn't mean that we can't take the steps forward to help others. And I think that's really the part, right? Like extreme mindset, right? It's almost like, okay, you're so extreme in your belief set that you can't see anything in front of you. Mm-hmm. But you could be on the far other side and be like, I'm so extreme in my belief set that I can't trust anything or believe anything, that now I'm not going to create anything or do anything good. I think it's like, I look at people, and honestly, for me, I think I'm a very spiritual person as far as like divine in God, and not everyone believes in that. They don't have to, but I believe in God very, very much. And I know for one fact I wouldn't be where I am today without guidance. And so I look to God for guidance. I don't look to influencers for guidance. I don't I don't look to certain people for guidance. I listen to people and I put together objectively what I can information feels like it makes sense to me. But most of everything that I've gone through up until this point, with even what I built today, has been through stomach, gut feelings.
Almost like an
And
intuitive wisdom, or like as if the divine is speaking to you when you get out of your way. I,
yes, because everyone's like, look, man, when you're building something out like this is super complex. I mean, this is as complex as Robinhood's app. You
Mhm.
know, at the end of the day, it is. It's cost a lot of money to build this thing, and these applications are very, very expensive. When I first started this, Chris, I had never built an app like this in my life. I wasn't even in the tech sector, believe it or not. But what I realized was that I was going to pull the right people together to help me build it. I could envision it, and if I could envision it with the right people, I can build it. And that was all of that envisioning, and all of these steps forward were divine thoughts. Like people are always like, Chris, you didn't read this article, you didn't do this, you didn't do all that, and I'm like, no, I don't. I live out in the country for a reason. The less chatter I'm around, the more I can think about what are the next steps forward. And of course, I pull in as smart of people as I possibly can to help guide those steps. But there's no guarantee in life, you know? So, I mean, I think we just have to realize that, you know, you could build something for a long time and end up with nothing. You could build the
Mhm.
most beautiful home and a tornado, earthquake, or fire come through it the next day. Like, get over it. It's reality. Like, people want guarantees, and unfortunately, what our society does, or the financial system has done, is made up false guarantees that are not real. And
Yes.
they have brainwashed everyone to believe that they're guarantees. And let me tell you, there's no guarantee of anything other than physically you won't be here one day. I mean, I don't know any other guarantee. But I think we have really done it. Our culture has done such a disservice, and it's all because of control at the end of the day.
You know, I think America is the only place in the world that I know of, and of course, I'm American, so I have a better finger on the pulse there, but where people will say, oh, eat the rich are bad, yet they strive to be rich themselves. As if when they became rich, that issue's for other people. But if I was rich, I'd be the good kind of good rich person. But everyone else, they're the bad kind of rich person. And that dichotomy must be so hard for people to be able to square that, oh, all money is the root of all evil. But secretly, deep down in my heart, I don't want to tell anyone this, but like, I really want a lot of money. And
It's
I'm
not
striving for that.
yeah, that's Chris, because it's not the root of all evil. That's a lie.
Mm-hmm.
The root of evil is action. You have two choices. You can take a negative approach action or a positive approach action. There is no book that you need to tell you this basic principality. You know, when you take an action, is it a selfish, self rewarding action? Or is it an action that's good for the benefit of everyone around that's involved? What you will find out is most people choose to take the bad action. And that is, and blaming money for their bad actions is an excuse. Their bad
Yeah.
actions are their bad actions. It's not the money. Look, I want more and more money too. I mean, money to me is energy. Without energy, I can't help. I have to have energy, and that's how I help the world. That's how I become a better person. But with that energy, the money that I create, the wealth that I create, the wealth that I help others to create through my application, I hope they use for the right purposes. But once again, we don't have to you don't have to show up in any place to know fundamentally if you're making a selfish decision or not. And what everyone, what I believe people need to realize is, if they look very, very deep within themselves, they know the actions that they take that hurt their wives and children indirectly. Women know the actions that they take that hurt their husbands and children indirectly. We know the actions that we take that hurt coworkers indirectly. And we know and if those actions are hurting others, they are ultimately hurting ourselves. You don't need someone to tell you this stuff. You need to get out of the TV, the social media, and find that place deep within yourself. And it's hard, man. I'm not gonna lie. I'm not saying I've perfected this, because I haven't, but I'm telling you, it is difficult. But me realizing what a selfish, shitty person I was for so long has been the biggest benefit for me in the last 10 years.
I
Undoubtedly.
would agree. And I think I'm on a similar journey. And I've recently come to a realization that, whatever you want to call it, God, the divine, infinity, truth, I think that the thing that if you if you open yourself up to it, whatever it is, and you stop attaching to thinking, you just let thoughts come in. Those thoughts come from the divine. And if you just let them in, those thoughts are truth. But our thinking, our attachment to the thought is what causes us to suffer. Because if you just, as more I explore my own mind as I meditate, thoughts just come in randomly. And if I just let them go, just pass on like a cloud, doesn't matter. But my thinking is when I attach to a thought, that's when suffering begins. Because now I believe that this thought is true, or why would this thought come in? But if you just allow the thoughts to come through you, and then you find the one that gives you the most energy, which thought can you take out into the world and give to the universe. It's almost as if the divine is trying to work through you itself. Like maybe God can't touch people directly, it can only touch people through other people.
I think that the divine thoughts that you get are real, and I think a lot of people have them, and we've been taught to suppress that. I think we're shifting in this world, and people are much, much more open to these things. I've noticed just in the last 5 years, things that I have in my house that are symbolic, I'm starting to see all over, man, that I never thought I would see. And they're popping up on. My wife just bought a dress with one of the things that I have in my house that it would just randomly, when we were in Dallas, I'm like, what is that on that? Like, how can that be? This is stuff that is like stuff people, would be like, whoa, But I think it comes down to there's
super woo woo, like you're getting outside into crazy land.
Yeah,
that's where I feel I'm living now. Like I'm living in crazy land.
You're not living in crazy land, because the reality is the world is a world of everything is a place of possibility. It's a matter of, the hard part is picking the information that you're getting and deciphering what is going to be most beneficial for you to front face forward to the world. And you pick that, and if that thought is to help and benefit the collective, then that is where you should put the stake in the ground and move forward and not give up no matter what it takes. If that means that you're going to lose that cush lifestyle, that house, but guess what? Let it go. You have to let shit go. I always told my wife, if we're going to get up this mountain, we got to drop this baggage. There's a lot of baggage, and some of it's mental, some of it's physical. If you're trying to build something great for the world, but you're trying when you first start it and you're trying to hold on to all this stuff, all those things are just taking bandwidth away from what you really should be focusing on. But we're taught, but we don't want to do that, because God forbid if we have to have our neighbors know that we're downsizing or walking away from something, or we are
it's
not
the judgment, the fear of judgment,
as great as we once were. All this stuff, like, it's all a bunch of bullshit, man, and it's all to keep you stuck in a box. The more shit you surround yourself with, the more you can't find your way out of it.
Chris, I want to give Dominic some time because I know he has questions, but
yeah,
you mentioned the carrying the baggage. And I have an analogy that I talk to my students about of, as you go through life, we pick up these bricks from family, bricks from society, bricks from ourselves of baggage, bullshit that's just weighing down our bags. And eventually, like you said, we have to be willing to put all that shit down, put the bags down. And what you can maybe be able to do is start to realize that these bricks can make a really nice road for other people to not have to go up all this shit. So you can use all this baggage that you've collected to be able to help other people by being able to express to people, these are things I've gone through so that you don't have to go through it. because you have to be secure in yourself, feel that you are enough, feel that you are a divine being. Therefore, you can suffer the slings and arrows of other people calling you an idiot. Because I know that anytime that someone opens himself up to criticism, most people want to tear people down, not because they want to see other people hurt. It's because they want to build themselves up because
Yep.
of where they feel they are.
And one thing to that is, just so people know, regardless of where you came from and how much wealth you create and how well you're doing, uh, the people that don't like it don't go away. So it doesn't matter if you can prove them all wrong tenfold. Um, it does not matter. So just so people know, like, it's just going to be there regardless.
100%. 100%. Yeah, I got some. We're going to move on to our Q&A section of the podcast. I want to be respectful of your time because I know we got a hard out here coming up pretty soon. So I've got a few questions. First question I wanted to ask you is, you talked a lot about risk, right? You're the type of guy who's, I mean, a thoroughbred entrepreneur, right? It's in your blood based on how you were raised and the lessons that life taught you. But I wonder, how much of risk do you think was something you were born with, like being risk averse, being, able to risk it all, and how much of that was learned?
So my wife, she would tell you that risk is inherently genetic in my bloodline. So she would say probably like 75%, I'm guessing, but somewhere in there. Obviously, she knows my family and she knows how they are. So she's always been like, that's not just like out there. That's something that is genetically in you, whether you want to admit it or not. And I don't know for sure. I mean, I guess to me, I would say it might be 60-40, but I think 60. Anybody can teach themselves to be a risk taker if they're willing.
Mm-hmm. And how do you deal with the fear of being wrong when you're taking the right risk? Is it a matter of, putting yourself too far out there, or is it just being, hey, whatever happens, happens?
Yeah, I think you just have to be okay with being wrong. I mean, there's been a lot of things that I've been right about, but there's also been a lot of things that I've been wrong about. I think, look, none of us are perfect and know everything by any means. I don't think we know anything. So to me, it's like, hey, if I'm throwing a shot out there, it's a 50-50. It's 50% I'm going to be right, 50% I'm going to be wrong. Now, maybe other people look at it and be like, Chris, you've calculated this better than maybe you realize. But in my mind, that's a simple take.
Absolutely. No, I think that's a solid answer. And I think a lot of our viewers could benefit from having a mindset quite like yours. You talked a little bit about how, if you would have had this mindset at your age now, back when you were 20, who knows what you would have become. And you've become a great man in that time. So I'm kind of curious, like, what would your message be to your 20-year-old self, or a 20-year-old self who's kind of coming up in the world like you were?
Yeah, I think, I'm a male, so it's easier for me to think of it as a male. Mm-hmm. But I really think that young men need to really focus on others and not themselves. I think as a young man, I was very selfish. And I think, I was very much, I was a young man who liked girls. I thought, and what I've realized was all that energy that I was putting into things that would not yield any validity at the end of the day. I really had to stop, and I had to realize that, hey, don't put so much of your energy into, for a male, girls or image or these things that don't matter. Put your energy into, hey, how can I make something that helps others? And if I can do that, the right people will surround me. And what happens is when we don't do that, the wrong people surround us. And then when the wrong people surround us, we manifest what we're around. We manifest all these terrible things. And I've got one of my sons is 14, and I try to ingrain this in him constantly, but he's very much, very focused into certain things, and I think he'll be fine. But I think that's a struggle as a young man. And one thing I'll say too is, I've talked to younger men, that have asked me questions and stuff, and I'm like, hey, look, think about this. Mm-hmm. You think because you go to college and you get a career path that somehow there's some guarantee that you're not going to walk into work and get fired? What difference is that than You've taken a risk on yourself creating something, and maybe in 3 years it doesn't pan out. You're going to learn a lot more from that because you took all the risk and you were willing to go through the triumph and the tribulation than to follow the path that we're told to follow. And at the end of the day, you walk into work one day and you have no job. And guess what you just did with your 401k and your retirement? You're now using it to survive, and it's gone. Well, who's taking the risk, really? Is it me? I believe I'm actually taking less risk by betting on myself than taking risk by betting on other people.
That's a very interesting concept, and I know Chris and I are going to have a field day with that on our Friday episode when we recap today's episode. But I want to finish with this one final question. What would be one piece of advice for our listeners on finance and mental health? Because we know that the personal side of finance is so much more important. The mental side is so much more important than maybe anything else. And maybe you have some tips that you learned along the way.
Yeah. Well, what I would call it would be, mental poverty is directly correlated with financial poverty. And I know that, I don't know if that's really a word that's used a lot, but my wife and I have talked about this a lot. And I think a lot of people live in mental poverty. And there's a lot of people that have money, financial means, that live in mental poverty. And I think what we have to do is once again, I urge anyone to take a step away. Take a step away from your friend groups. Take a step away and become very internal and start to look at your actions every single day without anybody around you, without any, Facebook, YouTube. I mean, I listen, motivational things are great, if they're pushing the right ideas, just like your guys' podcast, you're trying to help people. Listen to those things, but get away from all the noise of people and the negativity, because it's so easy to get drug into the negativity on like social media. Like Facebook's algorithm will push, no matter what, will push negativity, right? Like, let's just call it what it is. It's bullshit. And these things are inherently destructive, and they cause mental poverty. And when you are in a world of mental poverty, you can never get yourself out to create a place of financial success. And I think people just have to really, you got to be willing to just step away for, if it takes 6 months, and people are like, where the hell did you go for 6 months? That's a success. Because what I realized was when I decided I was going to do something, change my life, I walked away from all the groups I was involved in, everything I had to. And I went cold. I went dark. And like 3-4 years later, like people were like, what are you doing? And I'm like, I'm trying to change my life and help others. A lot of them didn't like it. But the thing is, I don't care. Because if I'm going to create something beneficial for the world, I cannot be in a world of mental poverty to do it.
100%. I think that's something that all of us need to really look on and see how our mindset affects our money. And, I think it's beautiful that you're saying that you have to go in almost like a meditative state and just leave your surroundings, leave your circle just to find yourself. I think there's so many examples in history where that was the best option and they came back even better, even stronger. And it's beautiful to see in you as well, how you were forced to change yourself and your surroundings, and you wanted more out of life to help people. And I think that's awesome. That's amazing.
I was just in Dallas for a couple of days for a business meeting. Mm-hmm. And, I told my wife, I'm like, I couldn't live here. It's a beautiful city. There is so much, and the people are very nice, but there is so much, there's so many options. Mm-hmm. It's bad for a mind like mine.
Too much.
My mind does better with less options, right? Like being in the country, being where it's quiet, it's good. I can only focus on doing the best I can every day. But if I was in a place where I could just like, hey, the best food in the world, the best, and nothing to get, but I mean, there's so much there, right? And everybody just has to know their personality. But going internal is how you find out who you truly are. And the hardest part is you're going to pick apart yourself, and you're going to realize a lot of that stuff came from your childhood. And I think it's an evolution, right? Like I'm still going through it, man. Like there's not a day that goes by where I'm like, dude, oh my gosh, like I just did something that I learned from my father. And that is not what I want to do. Or my mom or someone. And I'm like, whoa. Can't do that again. Got to stop Got to stop that now, here and now. And like I said, we're not perfect, but I think we can find our divine source. And if we can fuel that source, man, we realize that all these materials that you can just, they're gone. And if you can live with knowing that none of this matters and all that is here is you and the actions that you take and the help that you can give, I don't think there's a better place to be.
100%. 100%. Well, we appreciate your time. We appreciate you coming onto the podcast for the second time. You would be the first to be recalled back for the second one.
Well, hey, I appreciate it. I mean, I try to give the best, the best I can. But once again, I don't know everybody's situation. I think it's great that you guys are working to help people, and I want to see people take control of their mental and financial well-being in the future. And I think everybody's got the ability, and we don't have to live to all be rich. We can live to be rich in ways where we wake up every day knowing that we are loving and helping the people around us, which just seems like it's not possible, but it is possible.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Before we go, is there anything you would like to plug, your business, your personal brand, anything?
No, I mean, I think, obviously, realbricks.com, there's an app, and I think, I try not to push it too much because at the end of the day, I know it's going to grow the way it needs to grow. I have faith in that. And if I can tell anyone, any last words is have faith. Faith, true faith, not faith like I got faith, I can do. True faith is through action, relentless action. And I'm telling you, if you take relentless action with faith in your life, the right people will come to you. They will appear, and they'll help you build whatever you're trying to build. So, yeah, that's probably what I would have to say.
Beautiful.
Thank you so much, Chris.
Well
Appreciate you guys. You guys got my email. If you need to get a hold of me, you know where to get me.
All right.
For sure.
All right, buddy.
Thank you, Chris.
Talk to you. Bye-bye.
So with that, Chris Gerardi has left the building. Dominic, I'm so excited to break this down with you on 5 Friday feedback. But before we get there, tell me, what are your initial thoughts just before we leave and take a few days break before we come back to this?
Dude, I have chills. I honestly, when you told me like, what do you think? I was like, dude, I have a full notepad of notes. One of the last things he said was having truth faith through action. I love that. Confidence through the action. You don't get confidence through shouting affirmations in the mirror. You get confidence and faith through actually doing it. And I love that. There were so many things in this podcast where I felt like he was speaking to me. And ironically, he was speaking to me, right? But as a listener, it was so interesting because I know for myself, I might have come from a mental poverty framework. I know for me, I like to focus on others, to help others. And really, that was his why. And I think that's so interesting because most people don't start with others in mind. But I think it's the way humans were supposed to live, honestly. Mm-hmm. And that might sound like, Dom, what are you talking about here? This is you're getting out there, right? But I think if all of us just kind of had each other in mind, then we wouldn't have to worry about ourselves as much. And there's so much to break down on today's pod. I can't wait to get to Friday. Maybe should we move up Friday's pod up to maybe Wednesday or Tuesday? I don't know. I'm getting excited, but we'll keep it at Friday for right now. But what was your first initial thoughts on that one, Chris?
Dude, I love hanging out with other Chris. I'm really glad that we got to meet him. I have his cell phone number now. Yeah. He's where I want to be in another 10 years. And, I think I'm on the right path. We're talking with him, and maybe on Friday we can talk a little bit more about the ideas that we were talking about. We'll see where that conversation goes. I know we have a letter already ready for 5 Friday feedback. If we end up just blowing through that, we end up blowing through that.
100%.
I really want to explore these concepts with you. I've been working a lot on trying to figure out or working on concepts of what is truth, what is enough, what is the divine. And obviously I don't think I have the right answer, but I think I have an answer that does seem to work for me at this time. So maybe we can talk about that. We'll get kind of crazy out into the weeds and you'll make me think that Chris is like insane. Don't worry. I think I'm insane too. So me, Chris, not
you,
not
Chris.
Chris.
Yeah. I just want to clear out you, Chris. Yeah. We would never call anybody else insane. Unless it's like, bro, you're crazy. You're crazy for that. But big shout out to other Chris. We really appreciate you coming on to today's episode. And I checked out his website, realbricks.com. Very interesting place. Very, very interesting place. But yeah, that is it for today's episode. We hope you enjoyed, and we hope that you got some value out of this. Make sure you're always taking notes on this. I have a friend, I asked him, I'm like, how's it going? And he goes, oh, I'm taking notes on the pod, right? And he shows me every episode we've done, he's taking notes. He's a little behind on a few episodes because we'd be posting a lot. But with that being said, make sure to take notes, share those notes with a friend, share the podcast with a friend, like, subscribe, all that fun stuff. And if you are watching on YouTube, like, but if you are listening on one of the many platforms that we are on for podcasting, please give us a 5-star rating. It helps us reach more people, and the more people we reach, the better the world we can create, right? So with that being said, I'm Dom, he's Chris. We'll see you on Friday. Peace.
Later.
This video podcast is sponsored by Monzon Wealth. The content in this podcast is for informational purposes only and should not be considered financial advice. We do not endorse specific products or services. Past performance does not guarantee future results. The opinions expressed are those of the host and guests, not the podcast sponsor.
It is crucial to consult with a qualified financial advisor or professional who can provide advice tailored to your specific needs before making any financial decisions, investments, or taking any other actions. If you are seeking specified help, you can reach out to Chris at monzonwealth.com.